It's my nerd world, but welcome to it, a Star Wars show. This week, Acolyte star talks show details as Acolyte, as expected, goes full Darkside. Daisy Ridley visits Lucasfilm. What does this mean? She says it's nothing. I don't buy it. 3 years since the Rise of Skywalker. A controversial movie to be sure, but one that I absolutely adore. Plus, your listener feedback. Thank you so much for checking out the show this week. Let's get right to it.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
It is my nerd world, the Star Wars show, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. And again, glad you are with this week's episode. For me personally, I've been wiping out watching the Light and Magic documentary again on Disney Plus. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. As always, you can email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or if you happen to be listening to the show up on YouTube, like and subscribe to the channel. And you can leave a comment up on YouTube as well. Before we get into Star Wars news, I want to talk just briefly about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. The official trailer dropped. First Indiana Jones movie not directed by Steven Spielberg, James Mangold, who most recently directed Ford versus Ferrari, 3:10 to Yuma, Logan. Look, I'm a big fan of James Mangold's films, especially Ford versus Ferrari. I think that is an absolutely fantastic movie. The movie's been in production for a while now. There'll be some de-aging of Harrison Ford in the movie as seen in the trailer. Not the biggest fan of the title, but I'll be honest with you, I know very, very little about the story of the new Indiana Jones 5, essentially, Dial of Destiny. The trailer looked great. I'm not going to lie. I teared up just a little tiny bit. It had sort of, I don't know the vibes that I want to, what vibes I want to sort of assign it to. It feels, a lot like these sort of capstone movies that we've had come out as of late, where you have these iconic characters with a new cast of characters. I think of Jurassic World Dominion, not in terms of the movie itself, but the trailer in and of itself. Even when you look at the sequel trilogy of Star Wars, it kind of had that particular vibe to it, kind of a one last ride for Indy. And again, I don't know what exactly the Dial of Destiny refers to. I have seen a little bit of controversy swirling around the film within the fandoms again, because there are hack outlets out there that thrive off of making up information, and a lot of times when I post things online, just because of the name recognition that I have being a radio talk show host in a large market, I get comments from listeners and things like that, and people saying, well, I gave up on Indiana Jones after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and this movie, they're just setting up the female lead to become the next Indiana Jones. And James Mangold himself, the director, has come out and said that's not happening. There was a rumor going around that there was a test screening and that Kathleen Kennedy is setting the movie up so that the female character in the movie, who apparently is Indiana Jones's goddaughter, is being primed to be the next Indiana Jones. And James Mangold was responding to actual people online. Two people online. The actual director was responding to people online and saying, there's been no test screenings of the movie. What you're hearing is simply not true. It's the nature of what we deal with within fandoms now. I talk about it a bunch on the show, and I'll actually get into that a little bit later on with listener feedback. Either way, the movie looks like it's going to be a great time. I wasn't the biggest fan of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but I do enjoy the movie. But if you've listened to the show, you know that, for one, I'm kind of easily entertained, and I try not to get bogged down in a lot of things that other people do. There were moments in that movie that I thought were a little meh, wasn't the greatest. I didn't think that the core of the movie in and of itself, of these transcendental beings or whatever, was, spoiler alert, was the most compelling sort of MacGuffin in the film, but I still thoroughly enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I may even go and watch it this weekend. So Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny looks like it's going to be a step up from that. I would imagine it would be, just given the quality of movies that James Mangold puts forward. So I'm looking forward to the movie. I can't wait for it to come out. I'm a big Indiana Jones fan. I always have been since I was a kid. And Indiana Jones, especially Raiders of the Lost Ark, I remember specifically around the time of Star Wars, as that's what I was primarily into when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. And just the title in and of itself evoked such curiosity for me as a kid, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I just had never, I wasn't familiar with that term of Raiders of the Lost Ark, apart from maybe the football team being a kid. And it just seemed so just fresh and new. Even though it was telling this period piece of a film that's, sort of part fantasy. I can still remember seeing the poster for it for the first time, seeing Han Solo as a different character. It evoked the same kind of emotion that I got seeing the Blade Runner poster and seeing Harrison Ford as Deckard in that as well. So, again, looking forward to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Curious as to what you think. Drop me an email and let me know. All right, let's get on to some of the news this week.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So a couple of items. First off, we turn our attention towards the Acolyte. The Acolyte will show how the Sith infiltrate the Jedi Order. The Acolyte will take Star Wars fans on a journey that's never been done before, according to one of its stars. Speaking exclusively with Tech Radar during a junket for His Dark Materials Season 3, Daphne Keane, who was in Logan, which James Mangold, who's doing Indiana Jones, actually directed. And I loved her role in that movie, by the way. She's going to be in The Acolyte, teased that the forthcoming show, one of the many new Star Wars TV shows and movies in development, will be unlike anything fans have seen from Lucasfilm's legendary sci-fi series. Given the secrecy around the show, Keane, who was recently revealed as a part of The Acolyte's all-star cast, was hesitant to give too much away. However, the former Logan actor teased some bits about what fans can expect from The Acolyte, including a tiny but important piece of information about its plot. I can tease that it's a prequel. We knew this already. Keane joked when asked what she could say about The Acolyte. No, I mean, as you know, it's set 100 years before the prequel movies, and it's kind of an explanation of how the Sith infiltrated the Jedi. It's a Sith-led story which has never been done before. That really has me excited, by the way. It has me excited, but I'm also cautiously optimistic just because, as I've talked about on the show, the quality of some of the Disney Plus streaming shows have been very questionable. Things that I've been really excited about just haven't ended up, being as great as I had hoped that they would be. So I do have high hopes for this show. This sounds really interesting to me. Bad guys are always fun to watch. She went on to say, it's been really fun to film. The cast is amazing, and the director and crew are just lovely. The whole experience is wonderful, and I'm really excited for people to see it. As Keane says, Star Wars The Acolyte is set a century before the events of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The series, which began filming in late October, takes place during the High Republic era, a time when the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order were at the height of their powers. However, not all is as it seems. The show's plot synopsis, as revealed on StarWars.com, confirms that evil forces are stirring somewhere in the galaxy. And it's these events which play out in The Acolyte that eventually lead to the Jedi and the Galactic Republic's downfall in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. As such, The Acolyte will be fully canon in the Star Wars universe when it launches on Disney+. The Acolyte is a mystery thriller that will take viewers into a galaxy of shadowy secrets and emerging darkside powers in the final days of the High Republic era. The story synopsis reads, a former Padawan reunites with her Jedi Master to investigate a series of crimes, but the forces they confront are more sinister than they anticipated. So, I'm not sure when the release on this is. I think it's 2024. I'm pretty sure it's not coming out next year, as they just started filming. So I believe it's probably going to be sometime in early 2024. But I'm excited for this, as I am for all the Disney Plus Star Wars shows that are coming out. But I'm a little bit more cautiously optimistic, again, just based off of specifically the Kenobi, which I won't get into, again, as I've covered that enough on the show. But as always, what do you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. Let me know. And I want to make a comment, just as a side note, before we move on to some other news items and talk a little bit about 3 years post The Rise of Skywalker. But I've been watching the prequels with my son Kyle, my 15-year-old. He's seen them, but it's been a long time since he has. He doesn't remember them. So we went through The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones last weekend, and I assume we will wrap up watching Revenge of the Sith this weekend. It's been a fun watch after completing Andor. Simply because, and this happens, at least for me personally, this happens with this new Disney Plus content. As it relates to the movies, when we get further context on particular events, how it changes perspectives when going back and watching the actual films. Now, Andor, taking place after the prequels, doesn't have sort of that direct line except going backwards. And the thing that stuck out the most to me in a positive way, going back and watching the prequels, was how much more I enjoyed the political aspects of, both the Phantom Menace specifically, but, Attack of the Clones as well. Simply because Andor is such a slow burn in its sort of spy thriller tone, right? And its political tone, that it actually helps with the pacing for me when watching the prequels and has me much more interested in those Galactic Senate and political scenes that take place within those films. I didn't necessarily have much of an issue with them prior, but that is to say that for films that I've seen dozens and dozens of times that I know back and forth and have memorized, I did find a new level of enjoyment being able to sort of mentally reference Andor. So I thought that was kind of cool. Really looking forward to watching Revenge of the Sith this weekend. All right, a few more news items of note. Disney Plus announced this week that The Mandalorian Season 3 will premiere on March 1st of next year, obviously, which really isn't all that far away when you think about it. So, look, I'm excited to get back to Grogu and his daddy, the Mandalorian, and to get back into some traditional, doing nothing with my fingers, Star Wars. It's not a dig on Andor, it just is that I want to get back into some Mandalorian. So I'm really looking forward to Mandalorian Season 3. All right, let's move on to this and talk a little Daisy Ridley, future Star Wars in the movies, and 3 years post The Rise of Skywalker as we dive into listener feedback.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
So Daisy Ridley this week posted on Instagram her visit to Lucasfilm and confirming that she had lunch at Lucasfilm. And it's really, I mean, that's really the gist of the story. She went to Lucasfilm, posted some photos of her at Lucasfilm, posted a flashback picture of her with the cast of The Rise of Skywalker, said that was at Lucasfilm today, nothing fancy going on or something like this, basically. Nothing saucy or spicy happening. Just had lunch and reminded me of this picture 3 years ago, pointing back to 3 years post The Rise of Skywalker. So I highly doubt that Daisy Ridley just happened to go and visit Lucasfilm and have lunch there. I'm sure it's possible, but with the talk that has been going around of the Damon Lindelof movie that they are potentially working on that takes place post The Rise of Skywalker, and the potential that this could mean to have some of those other characters show back up. I think it's very, very possible that these are beginning conversations with Daisy Ridley about that particular film. The scripts are probably still being written, a long ways off from starting production. That's my guess on this. I can't imagine a post The Rise of Skywalker film that doesn't include some of those characters that were introduced in the sequel trilogy. So I want to kind of tie this into looking back a bit 3 years post The Rise of Skywalker. We're about a week or so out from when the actual movie came out. I think it came out on the 19th of December, if I'm not mistaken, of 2019. But, as I mentioned on a previous episode, those characters, Rey, Finn, and Poe, are key to a generation's exposure to Star Wars. And so, therefore, they are going to be important to those individuals. And most people's complaints, and even an email that I have here, don't complain about the actors in and of themselves necessarily, more just about how the movie didn't work for them. And there are stories that can be told that don't need to be extensions of what took place in the Rise of Skywalker. But there'll be plenty of time to go and debate and talk about the potential storylines of whatever that film will be. My point is here that I just get the feeling that this was not just a happenstance trip for Daisy Ridley based off of all of the available rumors that are going around with regard to a post Rise of Skywalker film potentially being in development. And a lot of the talk that I've heard from insiders on other podcasts is that movie is the one that's probably on the front burner, if you will, of being one of the first ones that will end up making it to the big screen. I think a lot of thought that it was going to be Taika Waititi's movie, but I just don't see that happening at this point in time. All right, we do have a listener feedback that talks a little bit about the sequels. Before we get to that, though, I just want to talk briefly and share with you some audio 3 years post The Rise of Skywalker. And I really do think, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, I think The Rise of Skywalker and the sequel trilogy in and of itself will be looked at much more favorably when we get more live action, or when we get more theatrical releases from Lucasfilm. This tends to be the way the fandom works. Especially now. The fandom seems to either love or hate that new thing that comes out. The stuff from before that was causing so much controversy sort of gets pushed off to the side. You have way less negativity attached to it, and suddenly now you hear a lot more positivity surrounding those particular, still controversial films. Case in point, I was doing a cursory Google search on The Rise of Skywalker just to see if there happened to be anything new written up. And the abundance of continued negative articles about that movie surprised me. It surprised me, but it shouldn't surprise me. But these were recent articles, again, just shredding, talking poorly about this film that I personally really do love. And I think The Rise of Skywalker is special for a couple of reasons. One, it's special because it did wrap up the 9 films as a whole, and I thought it did a very good job of wrapping up not only the sequel trilogy, but all of the films that came before it. It was also kind of the end of not only a Star Wars era, but the end of an era in the world as we knew it. Coming out in December of 2019, and then knowing what happens going into 2020. I mean, I have a fondness to the movie, not because of how much I love the film, but also just because of, what it means in terms of society and where we were at that time compared to where we ended up and now where we are and where we're going. So with that, I wanted to share with you this interview. I've played this before on the show, but I really do like this particular interview with J.J. Abrams talking about the Rise of Skywalker. So here's 3 minutes of J.J. Abrams talking about the Rise of Skywalker.
So between Rise of Skywalker and Force Awakens, I'm wondering which character changed the most after you cast the role?
Well, I'll say it wasn't so much that any one character changed more than another, but I know that on Force Awakens, the energy that between Rey and Finn, for example, was a different thing at the beginning. You know, we'd written a little bit more of a kind of contentious kind of relationship. And as we were shooting scenes, I was just feeling like it wasn't popping, it wasn't really working. And then I'd say cut, and then Daisy and John would be like, they would just be like the greatest of friends and have this amazing sort of, you know, a repartee. And I was like, what the hell is like every time I'd say cut, it was so much better than when I was saying action. And so we literally went back and rewrote their dynamic, not so much their characters, but just sort of who they were to each other, so that it was a bit more, you know, in line with and in sync with kind of who we actually had and what was clearly naturally the energy that was between them.
That energy radiates off screen, so I'm
yeah,
glad
they're amazing.
And
by the way, sorry, John and Oscar from the beginning were immediately, like, weirdly, wonderfully on fire. Like that was great from the get-go. Yeah.
I'm wondering one thing about a particular story beat. Why was it important to you to reassemble Kylo's helmet? And when you're crafting a beat like that, is there any concern about undoing the decision he makes in Last Jedi?
No, because I think that part of it is about his, you know, his commitment to the dark side. You know, he, as you'll see, he's becoming supreme leader, and without giving anything away, you know, his sort of focus has been a little bit, you know, more on practical matters. He's assumed, you know, that position within the First Order. And so this is a bit, it represents his sort of recommitting to the dark side, to the Knights of Ren, and then, you know, because of a very specific thing that he's about to go do. So it as you see in the story, there's a reason for it, which it might not be clear, obviously, at this moment to the audience.
I'm into the tease, though.
That's a great question.
You're probably not going to be able to give me any specifics on this, but I'm wondering, just from an emotional perspective, what was it like for you crafting the final shot of this film, the end of this trilogy, the end of the Skywalker saga, and did you always know what you wanted it to be, or was there any workshopping with it?
We knew, weirdly on this movie, we knew fairly early on. It took a bit to get there, but once we got there, we knew fairly early on how the movie ended. And that was something that was, we all felt like if we do our job and if it works, could be a very moving, you know, final piece. Strangely, in this movie, the first act was the one that was the most challenging. I mean, it was all challenging, but the first act, strangely, you know, was a bit of a puzzle, whereas normally in a film, I have found the first act comes pretty early and sort of stays what it is. That was not the case here.
So that was with Perry Nemiroff, and I believe she was still with Collider at the time when she recorded that interview with J.J. Abrams. I watch a lot of documentaries. I love watching documentaries, especially Star Wars documentaries. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I've been rewatching Light and Magic, the ILM documentary on Disney+. One thing that rings true in all of the documentaries for all the films is the love that goes into these movies, the attention to detail that goes into these movies, and the desire that the writers and the directors have to create the best piece of content, Star Wars content, that they can. I think that's why I tend to be a lot more forgiving when it comes to content and Star Wars content. If I'm entertained for the most part, you know, I'm happy. And it's why I'm a little bit more of an apologist, and I'll be honest, I am. I do think all of this is subjective. I don't get into this. If you objectively look at these films, you cannot admit that they're great. No, I'm sorry. I can objectively look at these films and also say they are subjectively great, because it's almost impossible to say, unless a film is just falling apart at the seams. You know, the effects don't work. Right, there's obvious sentence structure errors or things like that. All right, just you can't see a shot because it's almost pitch black. I mean, things like that. That's when you get into if you're looking at this objectively, sort of angle of it. That's how I see it when it comes to judging a piece of cinema. But for the most part, these films are put together really well, and they look great on screen. As a matter of fact, this listener feedback mentioned that. It mentions that, even though this individual doesn't particularly care for the sequels. I had a a talent coach, a consultant once, and I've said this before on the show, but I'll say it again because it's relevant here. I had a talent coach that came to me early in my talk radio career, and he said, be as genuine and as authentic as you can possibly be, and you'll reach the widest audience you're capable of reaching. And when I look at a film like The Rise of Skywalker, it's clear that J.J. Abrams, while he had a truncated timeline, J.J. Abrams, along with writer Chris Terrio, wanted to put together the best Star Wars movie that they felt they wanted to put together the best Star Wars movie they could, and wrote something that they both thought that they would enjoy. And it ended up reaching the largest audience it was capable of reaching. And for an individual like me, same rings true for The Last Jedi. I absolutely love these movies. And The Rise of Skywalker, to me, is from start to finish, through and through, a Star Wars film. It does something different than the other films do, like all three of the sequel trilogies do. I think there's more consistency in the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy than the sequel trilogy. All three of these films are very sort of unique in and of themselves, but they also flow together very well, in my opinion, and they are wholly enjoyable. When it comes to The Rise of Skywalker, I just find that movie on the simplest level to be absolutely and completely rewatchable. If I want to go and watch a Star Wars movie, I can just as quickly put in The Rise of Skywalker as I can A New Hope or the Empire Strikes Back. And when I go and talk about it like that, it just makes me want to go and watch the movie again.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right. Let's get to your listener feedback and your opinion. N. Blackie writes this: I think the lack of Andor viewership, potentially, and there's still some questions surrounding that, but that was the conversation that was taking place a couple of weeks ago as it relates to the potential streaming numbers of Andor. But they write is the cumulative effect of the subpar content that preceded it. Lack of trust in the quality of content I'm finding is very real. I'm your age, John, and in my house, my family would gather to watch The Mandalorian. If it weren't for Baby Yoda, I don't know if my kids would have stuck with it. We started to do the same with the Book of Boba, but everyone other than me lost interest and dropped off and didn't even finish out the series. Jump forward to Obi-Wan, and I was alone watching it. No one even wanted to give it a chance. That's how much trust was lost. I believe that if the quality was consistent from the start, more people would have watched Andor. Unfortunately, it's too little too late at this point. This can be traced back to the sequels. I know how you feel about them, and as an OG Star Wars fan, there are some good things to be found in the sequel trilogy. From a visual standpoint, they are superb. On the rare times I do put on the sequels, usually without the audio, I'll put on a record and have the sequels on as a visual accompaniment. I think the story of those is so poor and lackluster that they only work as silent movies, unfortunately. In terms of Andor becoming a classic, my take is this. I believe, or at least I'm hoping, Andor will be a shift in philosophy at Lucasfilm. I'm hoping they understand now the quality of the content is the most important aspect. I'm hoping Andor's legacy is that it represented a tonal shift in quantity over quality. In that way, I'm hoping it will become classic. As far as Star Wars back on the big screen, all I can say is they have to be very, very careful and calculated with what the next movie is. So much will be riding on it. I don't think they should rush back there. If I were advising them, I would tell them to steer clear of carrying on where the sequels left off. I don't think we need to go back to Rey, Finn, and Poe. Those characters were way too vanilla, way too sterile, and just flat-out boring characters on the whole. They should jump ahead. I have no idea why my dog is barking. They should jump far ahead or far into the past and start off entirely fresh, in my opinion, or do live-action adaptations of the best story arcs from the Clone Wars animated series. That pre-Vizsla Maul's Alliance arc could be a great adaptation. Just please, please, please don't awaken Rey, Finn, and Poe. That would just be the nail in the coffin. So to that, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, I appreciate your comments, but I disagree. I think that Rey, Finn, and Poe, for a generation of Star Wars fans, is their Star Wars. And there are a lot of young kids that have grown up now, because by the time we get back to the big screen, we're going to be looking at 2024, 2025, and you're looking at almost 10 years since the release of The Force Awakens. And so when you consider, a 9 or 10-year-old who was introduced to Rey, Finn, and Poe in The Force Awakens, grew up with the sequels, doesn't have the hang-ups that a lot of people have with the sequels, those characters are going to be their characters. It is going to be meaningful to them if they were to go and put them back on the screen. Now, it's up to Lucasfilm to go and decide what they do, but I can absolutely see why they could potentially go and tap back into those characters again, because that's what Disney is going to have to do. They're going to have to keep reconnecting with generations. And somebody made a great point that Star Wars really does work on those 10-year time frames between trilogies, where every 10 years you start up a new set of movies and storytelling. And that way you keep the generation after generation after generation engaged in this as they are introduced to new Star Wars. You look at the crop of individuals that are doing podcasts right now, the vast majority of them are younger people, younger than you and I, who are out there doing podcasts whose the prequels were their films that they grew up with. So, again, but this is coming from an individual that loves the sequels, but I do think that there is an incredible amount of popularity for Rey, Finn, and Poe for that generation that Disney is going to want to tap into. All right, Javier writes in, well, after watching all the episodes, I have to say another live action I'll not rewatch. It felt like nothing happened besides the robbery and the prison break. And speaking of Andor, it took 12 episodes to Andor to be a rebel, and Mon Mothma did what? Nothing. I heard a lot of people saying it was magnificent. Perhaps I didn't understand it. I didn't expect lightsabers and Jedis, but some action at least. At the beginning, I had my expectations high, but after Obi-Wan, I was prepared for this. So far, the only live action I've rewatched is Mando. The rest, never again. Please, please, I need a movie. Regards, Javier. And I understand where Javier is coming from. I really did enjoy Andor, but I also can see why there were some individuals like Javier who it didn't work for them. And I think, again, that's because it didn't have these other elements that we're used to seeing in Star Wars that sort of make it sort of whole Star Wars. I know that people that disagree with me, and that's cool. I don't need a lot of lightsabers. I don't even need any lightsabers. I don't need it to be a ton of pew-pew. That being said, Andor is great for what it is, and I think it's unique for what it is, but I'm personally looking forward to my more whole Star Wars in something like The Mandalorian, and beyond that, something where we get back into Jedis and the fantasy element. Good to hear from you, Javier. Thanks for writing in. And Miranda Alicia, a friend of the show, writes in and says, the Andor series was the best thing to happen to Star Wars in terms of being a show of quality and substance and taking the risk and the courage of being predominantly aimed for a mature, older audience rather than being pro-family friendly for a change, or bringing classic traditional Star Wars values and things that give it the bread and butter. This was a good thing to have now after a crop of lackluster and mostly not good enough content. I do believe there is a strong possibility that in the coming season we will see the Andor series amplify the hype and gradually usher in the balance of classic and non-classic Star Wars element or vibe that came from Rogue One, including a possible appearance from Bail Organa and Galen Erso in the days of the Empire, why he left and how that led to the Empire bringing him back to build the Death Star. I don't know. What do you think? Thank you, as always, for the comment, Miranda. And I tend to agree. And this is a different sort of... Andor was different from the aspect of Tony Gilroy was not a fan of Star Wars. He was introduced to... And he was actually... my impression was of Tony Gilroy when it came to Star Wars, he was kind of put off by it. But he came into the Star Wars universe via Rogue One, so he had some familiarity with it. He wrote a story that they turned into 12 episodes that, as I've mentioned before, you could have taken and tweaked it and put it into virtually any era whatsoever just based off of the straight content of what had taken place. There was nothing fantastical in it that made it specifically Star Wars-centric in terms of the main storyline. So therefore, again, you could sort of take it and place it in whatever genre you wanted with a few minor tweaks here and there. And therefore, the injection of particular Star Wars items into it were kind of done secondary when they would reach out, I think, to the story group and say, hey, what can we add? What can we add? I do have to laugh, by the way. Well, let me answer Miranda's question. I absolutely believe that Season 2 is probably going to be the season that will make this. I will probably like Season 2 more than Season 1 as we get closer and closer to Rogue One. And we do have the potential to have more of Saw Gerrera, potentially Director Krennic, maybe even a young Galen Erso. All of these things that could take place as we get closer to Rogue One, as we know the final scene in Andor Season 2 will be leading right into the beginning of where we saw Cassian Andor in Rogue One. So I'm very much anticipating and looking forward to watching, Season 2, and I think that I'll end up liking it even more. But the last point I want to make before I wrap things up is this. I do have to laugh a little bit because we hear so often in the fandom people going and talking about the fan service taking place, right? And they're always ripping on, there's no fan service, there's no fan service. And I have to, first off, I hate that argument. But I have to laugh because in the episodes in Luthen's shop, there's been all these items that are references to other things within the Star Wars universe. And even things that aren't in the Star Wars universe. There's 2 different Indiana Jones references that people have pointed to. Is that not fan service? I mean, you've got Amidala's headpiece there, right? You have the Gungan, shield. You have armor from The Force Unleashed. You have the stones from the Temple of Doom. You have the whip from Indiana Jones encased in carbonite. Okay, and those are Indiana Jones items, but there are all these items that related to other content. And so, I have no problem with it. I think it's fantastic. I love it. I already don't like the fan service argument, but I have to laugh because here's a show that people love, and especially those that say they're tired of fan service, and yet I kind of chuckle at the fact that is like the definition of fan service. But then again, I know that definition is kind of a moving target for a lot of different people. So, or there's a different definition that people have as it relates to what is indeed fan service and what is not fan service. So, just wanted to go and point that out. All right, before I wrap up the show, I want to remind you, I hope you'll support My Nerd World and the podcasts that I do through My Nerd World. And if you like to read, that you will treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction, and check out my EMBARK, a space opera series. As Earth faces its end, the fight to rule the stars begins. Keith Amaro knows fellow pilot Taft Guardia has feelings for her, but after the passing of her aerospace engineer father, she focuses solely on her flying skills. When a D-Corp, civilian and military spacecraft factory suffers a catastrophic accident, Keitha receives a cryptic message from her past. Unaware of the apocalyptic chain of events, Taft agrees to help investigate. Meanwhile, the ruthless Ascenta Argum of D-Corp attempts to exploit the global evacuation. Taft and Keitha will need each other more than ever after discovering what may be the key to saving humanity from the tyranny of D-Corp's evil leader. Follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey of survival from Earth to the far reaches of space as they fight for humanity's future among the stars. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction written for adults but great for ages 11+. Go and buy EMBARK Book 1 today. It's available in ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. If you like your science fiction space opera epic filled with romance action, then EMBARK is perfect for you. It's on Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. Just search for EMBARK and Jon, Jon Justice. So, go pick yourself up a copy. I am in the process right now of editing the audiobook for Battle Planet, the last book in the series so far. It does complete the story in book 7. Hopefully I'll have that out in the next couple of weeks. So again, head on over to Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net, and on Amazon, search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, and pick up your preferred copy of my book. I think you'll really enjoy it. All right, that wraps up the show for this week. Thank you so much for taking time out to listen to My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.